If the mid-1950s were a tense time, in the late 50s and early 60s, life got even more so in Europe. Life got more sexual. East Germany built the Berlin Wall. The nuclear nightmare grew. Movie makers had to take all this on board, and also the fact that it was now 60 years since the first ever film had been screened here. Movies were no longer the bright, young, new art form. In the cafes of Paris, this film studio in Rome, and on the streets of Stockholm, filmmakers planned a revolution. They changed the movies for good, made them more personal, made them more self-aware. The shock of the new. 4 legendary European directors, Ingmar Bergman, Robert Bresson, Jacques Tati, and Federico Fellini, led the way in making movies personal. Here in Stockholm in the 50s, the curtain went up on the profoundly personal films of a director for whom cinema was like theatre. This man, Ingmar Bergman, Danish director Lars von Trier.
I have seen all of Bergman's films. Glass Dark, one of my favorite films. I don't know what it has to do with the Antichrist problem, but then Bergman has had a great influence on me, especially he's very good with words. I just saw this last film was called Saraband or something like that, which is maybe not a great film, but it is of course a good film because he made it. But the words are so good.
In the Swedish Film Archive, there's a drawing that Bergman did of his family when he was a boy.
And the brother as well.
And this is Ingmar with his books?
Yeah. Learning.
The caption says that his dad is impossibly authoritative. Bergman shows himself surrounded by books. And look at this drawing. In his early teens, Bergman claims to have been locked in this building, a hospital mortuary. He saw the dead body of a beautiful young woman, pulled back the sheet covering it, almost touched her genitals. Touch and death, the 2 great themes in his work. One of Bergman's great early films, Summer with Monica, was amongst the most sensuous of its time. And not only was the sexuality modern, Bergman allowed actress Harriet Andersson to look straight into the camera. Film historian Stig Björkman.
What struck Godard and some of his comrades from the New Wave generation was the freshness in which Bergman had filmed the story, and this daring moment, of course, when Harriet Andersson looks intensely into the camera and the camera is drawn towards her and Bergman darkens the background behind her. So it was a kind of cinematic trick which hasn't been tried before.
This scene from Bergman's best-known 50s film, The Seventh Seal, shows the evolution in his thinking.
Är det så grymt otänkbart att fatta Gud med sina sinnen? Varför ska han gömma sig i en dunstkrets av halvuttalade löften och osedda under? Hur ska vi kunna tro på de troende när vi inte tror på själva?
During the Middle Ages, when the Black Death is rampant, a knight who has returned from the Crusades agonizes about mortality. It's as if the knight has seen Summer with Monica and realizes that the senses are amongst the best things we have, and so uses them to question God. 5 years later, in Winter Light, Bergman seems to have concluded that God is finally dead, The central figure is, like his father was, a clergyman.
Bra präst. Jag har trott på en orimlig, alldeles privat, faderlig Gud som visserligen älskade människorna, men mig mest av alla. Förstår du, Jonas, mitt fruktansvärda misstag? Förstår du vilken dålig präst det måste bli av en sån instängd, bortskämd, ängslig stackare?
Death would spread through Bergman's cinema like a cancer. First God died, then people. Winter Light was also a reminder of how autobiographical his films were, how boldly personal. Bergman's wife, Ellen Lundström, had skin eczema. When they argued, he'd sometimes complain about her eczema. Now look at this scene between the clergyman and a school teacher who's in love with him.
Jag är trött på dina omsorger. Ditt pjoller. Dina goda råd. Dina små ljusstakar och borddukar. Jag är utledsen på din närsynthet. Dina fumliga händer. Din ängslighet. Dina ängsliga ömhetsbetygelser. Du tvingar mig att sysselsätta mig med dina fysiska omständigheter. Din dåliga mage. Ditt eksem. Dina dagar. Din förfrusna kind.
This is Bergman confessing his guilt about how he treated his wife and showing how people humiliate each other. Bergman's film Persona shows that not only did he use film as a confessional, he used it as a self-aware. By the 1970s, Bergman had been making films for 30 years. He continued to refine his ideas. For decades, he had been filming beautiful faces and seeing pain in them, ugliness, something about Sweden or life in general, its loneliness, mortality, and despair. Faces were symbols for Bergman, on stage or projected, as if by a magic lantern. He wrote each of his films in a notebook like this. These ones are blank. They're kept by the Swedish Film Institute, a symbol of his unmade films. Where Bergman's central metaphor was the theatre, the second outstanding art film director of the time, Robert Bresson, thought of human life as a prison from which we must break out. This is where Bresson lived, the Ile de la Cité in Paris. Between 1950 and 1961, he made 4 films about imprisonment. One of them was Pickpocket. Look at this scene where the pickpocket goes into the Gare de Lyon in Paris to steal. It's not exactly the searing, colourful melodrama of All That Heaven Allows or Mother India, both made in the same year. Are there plainer, less adorned images in film history? The lens is 50mm, the lighting's flat, the clothes are what ordinary people wear. There's no expression on the man's face. The composition isn't unusual in any way. Welcome to the world of Robert Bresson. He wrote, "One does not create by adding, but by taking away." And he follows this law to the letter. Everything expressive is taken away here. Like Ozu, his films are expressive of no inner chaos or fire. He wrote, "No actors, no parts, no staging." Stardom, that thing that began 50 years earlier with Florence Lawrence, was nowhere in his work. A total rejection of gloss, MGM, razzmatazz, the bauble. Like Dreyer, he sandblasted film history. Why? Take this beautiful, unsettling film, O Hazar Balthazar, about a donkey which, throughout its life, is treated cruelly. Bresson films it in close-up, simple framing. The donkey, of course, has no expression. We can't read its feelings. The pickpocket is blank like the donkey. By stripping out material things, by stripping movies of their 60 years of excess style. Bresson wanted to hint at what he called the invisible hand, directing what happens, the hand of God. His films are about the route to God. Cinema was for him a path to grace. This is the church where he worshipped. Once, walking in these gardens beside this church, Notre Dame, he saw something. He writes, I saw approaching a man whose eyes caught something behind me which I could not see. At once they lit up. The same moment as I saw the man, I had perceived the young woman and child towards whom he now began running. That happy face of his would not have struck me so. Indeed, I would not have noticed it. This is the root of Bresson. In his films, he tries to show the invisible, the ineffable, the transcendent. At the end of Pickpocket, the thief has been imprisoned for his crimes. His girlfriend arrives. He's finally found grace.
Quelque chose illumina sa figure.
This is where the prison metaphor in Bresson reveals its full richness.
Oh Jeanne, pour aller jusqu'à toi, quel drôle de chemin il m'a fallu prendre.
People are imprisoned in their own bodies. They have to escape from them to apprehend the divine. Paul Schrader.
I think Freud had a phrase for it. The representation of a thing by its opposite. If you push away far enough, you'll get there. You'll get to the thing you're pushing away from. One thing that I did in Taxi Driver, we did in Taxi Driver, which is by doing what I called a monocular film, which is having the same character in every single scene, which I just kind of cribbed from Pickpocket and Bresson, and never letting the audience be privy to any other reality, any intercutting. You know, the only world you know is through your protagonist. If he doesn't see it, you don't see it. And then by using interior monologue, you can, if you can hold the audience long enough, which is probably about 45 minutes, you can make them empathize with someone they do not feel is worthy of empathy. And then you're in a very interesting place as a creator.
And it wasn't only Schrader who was influenced by Bresson. Here in India, he had a deep impact on the work of 70s directors like this man, Manny Call. In Poland, Krzysztof Kieslowski saw Bresson's films and they shaped his decalogue. And the Scottish director Lynn Ramsay's film Ratcatcher is hauntingly attached to objects in the physical world, like Bresson. Still in France, the third great unclassifiable director of the late 40s and 50s was Jacques Tati. As we've seen, his comic character, Monsieur Hulot, was a response to Charlie Chaplin. Hulot leant forward and wore trousers too short, whereas Chaplin, the character, leant back and wore his trousers too long. Tati knew a hairdresser called Lalouette, a happy bungler, a bull in a china shop, a holy fool, and based Hulot on him. Like Bresson and Ozu, Tati disliked strong storytelling, preferred little incidents, details. Scottish director Bill Forsyth.
I think a lot of filmmakers think a story is the purpose of the film, and that the characters and the actors really have just got to service the story and take it to where it's going. And that seems to me to be the complete opposite of what should be happening, because there should be no story. I mean, we spend our lives inventing stories, but story actually doesn't exist. You know, we exist, and our apprehension of a story is how we explain the kind of meanderings that we take. So there's no such thing as the empirical story. You know, it's just what happens to people.
Tati's film Mon Oncle show his and Hulot's feelings about modern life. Hulot lives in an old-fashioned, typically French part of town, onions round the door, charcuterie shops. Tati films the old world in warm sunlight. Hulot's nephew lives in a brand spanking new, ultra-modernist house in another bit of town. Tati films this in flat light. The new world's pretentious. Hulot's sister-in-law only turns on her fish fountain when important guests arrive.
Oh, what a surprise! I was just passing and I...
The buildings of modern architect Le Corbusier were very fashionable in the 50s. Tati filmed the old world, in part here, Saint-Maur, a traditional part of Paris. Modernity was coming here like an express train. Tati found the conflict delicious, hilarious. He made cinema laugh at modernity. And, like Bresson, he filmed with incredible rigour. He never used close-ups. He wanted to show the whole picture of a society, its comedy of manners. Sometimes key details appeared in a tiny part of the frame. In this famous scene in Mon Oncle, the frame doesn't move, but our eyes do. They follow Tati around the frame as he appears at each window. Hulot often looked lonely in Tati's frame. Tati found it harder and harder to get his unique, reserved comic cinema funded, and so ran this cinema in Paris. The name of this cinema, The Harlequin, introduces the world of the fourth great personal modernist director of the 1950s. Where Bergman's world was a theatre, and Bresson's was a prison, and Tati's an intricate jigsaw of scenes and moments, Federico Fellini's was a circus. He ran away to one in 1927 when he was 7. He loved the colour of the circus. He loved its constructed world. The circus world was larger than life. He took this love of the circus here to Cinecittà, Rome's legendary film studio. This is a Baroque scene from Casanova, which he made here. To Cinecittà, which became his home, he brought things from the real world, his childhood, neorealism even. But then he drew other worlds. Fellini was a cartoonist. And he had those worlds built here. This is Maestro de Angelis, who made some of the props for Fellini's films. One of the first films that shows how modern Fellini was this one, The Knights of Cabiria. Fellini's wife, Giulietta Massina, plays a prostitute. She lives by night, wears feathers, dances with the boys. This shot makes you feel Fellini's love for her. In the second half of the film, Fellini's greatness becomes apparent. Massina goes to a Catholic shrine. She asks for the Virgin Mary's grace, but nothing happens. In Bergman's The Seventh Seal, God was missing. In Nights of Cabiria, God is long gone and kitsch is all that remains. After this spiritual disappointment, Massina meets a man. He takes her to a cliff top. There, Fellini elevates his film once more. The crisp, bright Roman light becomes Scandinavian, like an early movie by Victor Sjöström. Beads of sweat appear on the man's head. Does he want to push her off? He takes her money and runs. Back on the road and alone again, mascara runs down her cheek. Out of nowhere, teenage musicians appear. She smiles slightly. Feelings in these late scenes cascade. The Nights of Cabiria kept outdoing itself, changing style. In the 60s, Claudia Cardinale was Fellini's muse.
You know, with Luchino Visconti, nobody, you couldn't speak. No smile, nothing, silence. With Federico, everybody was shouting, singing, the telephone, everything. Because for him, the noise gave him inspiration. Just the opposite.
In Fellini's film 8½, Marcello Mastroianni plays a director wanting to make a film. Cardinale plays the director's muse.
I was very young when I did the movie. And to be the muse of Federico Fellini, it was incredible. The one when I'm the muse, all in white, and I'm running, and it's like I'm flying. It's incredible the way he could, change the image. He just transformé tout, quoi. It's incredible. And I bring the water to Marcello.
Signore?
It was decided at the last minute, everything. Because no script, everything was, improvisation. And I remember one scene also incredible because I'm a terrible driver. And I said to Marcello, I'm not driving, I'm terrible. And when we are doing the scene, Federico was sitting next to me. And he was always asking me, you are in love with you. Who is the one you love? And after, Marcello has to say it. And you repeat what Federico said. Because no script, it was just improvisation.
Claudia, di chi sei innamorata? Con chi stai? A chi vuoi bene?
A te?
Sei arrivata proprio in tempo, sai?
I remember you when you were on the set. He was always sitting there, looking at you like, with all the actors, he was like this. He loved the actors. Yes, totally free, and it was a marvelous atmosphere on the set, really.
Fantasies mixed with memories, mixed with imagined conversations. The precedent was the stream of consciousness writing of James Joyce, but also the Impressionist films of Abel Gance. David Cronenberg, Martin Scorsese, the Serb director Kusturica, and David Lynch have all been influenced by Fellini. It's hard to think of any filmmaker, apart from Charlie Chaplin and Alfred Hitchcock, who's been more influential. This is the opening scene of Woody Allen's Stardust Memories. Like the opening of 8½, the main character seems to have stepped out of his own life and is looking at it. Like there's a pane of glass between him and it. Like it's a party to which he hasn't been invited. No one, not even Méliès or Cocteau, could wave a magic wand like Fellini. He tuned a radio signal into the frequencies of myth and sex, memory and rapture. Bergman, Bresson, Tati and Fellini did so much to open up the form of cinema in Europe in the 50s and 60s. But then it was carpet-bombed by French filmmakers. The story of film had been upended before in the 20s and again with Italian neorealism in the mid-40s. But this time was the biggie. The bombers, the French New Wave directors, saw great films here in the Cinémathèque Française. This was their rocket fuel. They'd sit in cafes like this and mix their passion for cinema with the new ideas about existentialism, an explosive combination. Paul Schrader.
Movies were becoming an intellectual enterprise more and more. You were looking at the film school generation. The first generation of filmmakers that are coming at film from college. Before that, you came from newspapers, you came from theater, you came from TV, but now you're starting to come as film buffs. And therefore, the average film director is more intellectual and more self-aware. As a result, he starts looking at Europe because, that tradition was already alive and well at that time. The idea of the intellectual cinema and the camera stilo and all of that.
Shocked and heads out onto the streets. Shots from her point of view. Real streets, real people. She gets lost in her own thoughts. The woman goes to a park. She's gradually less weighed down by her apparent diagnosis. She seems almost carefree. Then she meets a man. The man seems to be remembering, looking at a woman.
Vous ne faisiez pas un geste. Je vous ai dit que vous aviez l'air vivante. En guise de réponse.
But the film actually questions what's real.
Pour dire quelque chose, j'ai parlé de la statue.
The camera cranes up to a statue, which is in a garden with a balcony in front of it.
En danger, mais ça n'était pas incompatible.
But then we see the exact same statue, and there's now water in front of it.
Droit devant eux. Il vient d'arriver en haut d'une falaise abrupte.
As these two shots are memories of the man, has he misremembered? Or is director René, on purpose, making us question the very building blocks of film storytelling, continuity, memory, and truth? No previous film had been more about uncertainty, a key theme in modern life.
Alors je dis que c'était vous et moi, aussi bien.
Varda and René were left-wing, but this self-taught young critic, François Truffaut, felt that conventional movies were too left-wing, too social. He wanted films to be fresher, more of the moment, more a celebration of the medium itself. But then came this man, Jean-Luc Godard, the most fascinating character in the French New Wave, the greatest movie terrorist. In his youth, he sat in this cafe, holding a rose, imagining that he was Jean Cocteau. He saw Bresson's film Pickpocket 10 times. He once called his approach to life right-wing anarchism. Godard said that the story of film is about boys filming girls and about men worrying about mortality and women not doing so. As we've seen, the great Catholic French critic André Bazin said that cinema is best when the shot's wide, when our eyes can wander within it. But Godard was such a loner, someone said that he had a frenzied individuality, that he preferred close-ups, which isolated people from the world. And so, when Godard eventually came to make his first film, what did it look like? This. A car thief with an American girlfriend. Close-ups filmed by cameraman Raoul Coutard. using short rolls of film sold for stills cameras. The back of her head, then cut. The same angle, same girl, same hair, same speed, then cut again. As we've seen from the days of Edwin S. Porter's The Life of an American Fireman onwards, a cut almost always took place to show something else. But Godard uses cuts to show the same thing, but with the sunlight from a different direction, or a slightly different background. There'd been jump cuts before in movies. In this Soviet film, for example, they're used to show a man's mental agitation. But in A Bout de Souffle, they aren't trying to express the woman's mental state, for example. They're there because they're beautiful in themselves, because they emphasize that this is cinema, just as Picasso and Braque used cubism to emphasize the surface of a painting. How modern. Godard and François Truffaut saw cinema not as something that simply captures real life, but that's part of it, like love or cafes. Movies were part of the sensory experience of, say, sitting in a cafe, watching the world go by. Again, back to Jean Seberg's neck. These shots didn't say, here's a woman in a car, which is part of the film's story. They said, I think this moment is beautiful. This moment is true. In other words, I think. A shot is a thought, a director's thought. This was the ultimate bomb that the new wave planted under cinema. But not everything they did was revolutionary. Looking back, it's clear that in their love of old movies and in their traditional views of women, much of the new wave was almost classical, not a million miles away from the Hollywood bubble. Australian director Baz Luhrmann.
If you've been used to the cinema only being about beautiful sets, wonderful costumes, sweeping shots, big emotions, and someone comes along and says it's a girl in jeans with a white t-shirt that says the Herald Tribune on it, and the camera is going to move and it's going to feel like a news report, you're going to go like, yeah man, that's like life. Well no, actually, it's just another cinematic device. And let me say, as a kind of reinterpretation of lovely costumes, big gestures, you know, is alive in cinema now. I mean, you know, and it's a new permutation of that. Again, we'll see another rejection of that. I mean, the language, good language, is a living thing. It changes, it evolves. What you're saying never changes. People still say, I love you. People still say, I will kill you. How they say I love you, how they say I will kill you, it's fashion.
But whether the new wave was really new, it was incredibly influential across Europe and the rest of the world. To see how obsessive Godard's followers were, for example, look at this sex scene from Jean-Luc Godard's Une Femme Mariée, and then Paul Schrader's An American Gigolo. The same framing, body parts, camera angles, blank background. In a European art film, Godard breaks the space up into pieces and the body into parts. In a mainstream American film, Schrader does the same. But this was only the beginning. The new wave of modern cinema swept across the whole of Europe. In Italy in the 60s, movies became more exciting than ever before. Society was changing fast, very fast. Workers and peasants were moving into the cities, into apartment blocks like this, which Mussolini had built way back in the 30s. Whilst filming here, this man, Raffaele Feccia, comes up to us and asks what we're doing. He's polite with old-style manners. When we say we're making a film about cinema, he says he knew a man, a famous man, a director with whom he once played football as a boy, Pierpaolo Pasolini.
Come si chiama?
Marina.
No, lei.
Io Raffaele.
Raffaele.
Un bel ragazzo, era forte, Lo faceva il karate. Era cintura nera.
Pasolini was a lightning rod in Italian cinema in the 60s. He'd experienced fascism at first hand, so wrote for this communist newspaper. He was a Marxist and Catholic who was, in his way, against both these things, the state on the left, the church on the right. He was a poet, he was gay, and he used the word stupendous a lot. His life and work were stupendous. He was born in the north, but hung out here, where the people weren't rich, where the guys were young, where 60s consumerism hadn't yet corrupted. Accattone, Pasolini's first film as director, passionately captured his life experiences. It was about a pimp in dirt-poor Rome. Pasolini saw him almost like a saint. He used religious music to make everyday struggles spiritual. Director Bernardo Bertolucci was Pasolini's assistant on Accattone.
He wanted to do close-ups, still shot, and still shot of medium shot, but the camera wasn't on wheels like my camera is always moving on wheels. Pierpaolo was thinking much about the primitive Tuscan paintings. They always have these close-ups of saints, and Pierpaolo was influenced by that. And in fact, in everything, in the novels, in the poems, in the movies, a kind of strong sense of the sacred, so that even a face of a pimp would become a saint from the painting. He was, in fact, a fantastically religious person. Not a religion that takes you to church, but he was religious in front of life, in front of mystery of life.
In a secular and consumerist age, this was daring. It was the spareness and seriousness of Accattone that made it modern. On its release, Accattone was picketed by fascists. 2 years later, Pasolini made a film that boldly challenged the otherworldly way that the Virgin Mary is usually shown in Catholic art. Pasolini's The Gospel According to St. Matthew pictured the Madonna like this, unadorned, back to basics, spare. In order to show his cinematographer what he had in mind, he took him to see this film by the great paint stripper in film history, Carl Theodor Dreyer. The simplicity of the filming of this pious woman influenced the filming of this pious woman. And Pasolini wanted to strip the paint not only from cinema, but from life. He felt that consumerism was taking over, that people like this were turning into people like this. Pasolini's sometime assistant, Bernardo Bertolucci, worked with another of the great innovative personalities in Italian cinema in the 60s, Sergio Leone.
Leone was one of the best Italian directors in the sense that Italian directors were doing, all of them, they were doing Italian comedy. I hated it. I didn't like it at all.
Leone resisted the allure of comedies and instead opted for a genre that was dying out in America in the 60s, the Western. In A Fistful of Dollars, Clint Eastwood's character was lonely and mysterious because Leone loved Kurosawa's films. Eastwood as the nameless samurai, reluctant to trust, squared up to by others.
Hey.
But what was really innovative was the visual style. In this scene, for example, the foreground and background are far apart, but sort of in focus. This was rare in widescreen cinematography. Usually shallow staging was used. Leone could do deep staging because the Italians invented something called technoscope in 1960. Leone was the first director to exploit this to the full. It gave his imagery a dramatic, epic quality. Imagine that these two poles are, say, Sergio Leone gunfighters. In conventional widescreen shallow focus, one of them would always be out of focus. Technoscope allowed Leone to have both in focus. Leone's great epic western, Once Upon a Time in the West, took these innovations and applied them to a mythic screenplay, co-written by Bertolucci.
It was great because also it was my only way through a Western to smell a bit of what I liked, which was very much the Hollywood movies of those years.
Once Upon a Time in the West's famous opening sequence shows gunmen waiting for a train that's bringing the man they're to kill. Time has stood still. Leone's channeling the Italian neorealist idea that time in cinema should be real, like life. Screenwriter Bertolucci and Leone had seen Nicholas Ray's film Johnny Guitar, the classic western in which Joan Crawford prowls like a cat as she waits for the railroad to come to bring modern life to the West. They loved this idea of waiting for the future and used it here. In Once Upon a Time in the West, the train also brings Claudia Cardinale, a widow who inherits a homestead.
I mean, I'm the only woman there. I'm surrounded by men. We start on the train. It was in Spain. And then the camera goes up.
Leone has this shot rise up as if to view the whole of human history.
He invented this slow motion on your body. And you know what he did also, something, the first one? Before we start the scene, he put the music of the film. Then, you know, you become immediately the part you are doing. And it's the only director who did that. And also the way he was, you know, shooting with the camera on your body, on your face, on the eyes.
Like a Buddha Souffle, this climatic gunfight in Once Upon a Time in the West is about films themselves, the pleasure of watching them for their own sake. Its crane shot is more beautiful, its music more operatic, its conflict more elemental than any previous Western. Leone's work casts a long shadow. The best Western director of the 70s, Sam Peckinpah, said that he'd be nothing without Leone. Stanley Kubrick said that Leone influenced A Clockwork Orange. Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet has several Leone sequences, and Martin Scorsese and John Milius learnt from him. But there was still more to the Italian New Wave in the 1960s. Count Don Lichino Visconti di Modrone, one of the country's leading aristocrats, was born and brought up in this palazzo, about as unmodern a place as you could find. In the 30s, he escaped fascist Italy and became a communist. In the 50s, he directed opera in Milan. The scale and emotions of opera entered his film work. This is the opening scene of his film Senso. The colour, lighting and costumes are so sumptuous that you'd think that this is a celebration of such aristocratic life. But it's not. Its heart is with the ordinary people and the gods. They're protesting. They look down on the aristocrats. This says so much about Visconti's films. He was a master of the crane shot, but instead of using it to celebrate the aristocratic world, he used it to float through that world, look down on it, fascinated, attracted, and repelled. As a Marxist like Pasolini, he thought that workers and peasants had the greatest moral authority in society. From some scenes in a moving tram, a kind of working class crane shot. Society and beauty. It's as if Marxism itself was a crane shot. Where Visconti pictured people in a kind of historical opera of social class, the next great Italian director of the 60s, Michelangelo Antonioni, saw life more abstractly and framed it like this, on the edge. In his 1962 film L'Eclisse, Alain Delon's a Roman stockbroker. He starts a relationship with a woman played by Monica Vitti. Almost at once, we see that Antonioni frames his people unconventionally, modernly, on the edge of the screen or half hidden. Antonioni had studied American abstract painting, and his films looked like canvases of modern life in which people only partially appear. Antonioni seems to see an emptiness in the relationship between Vitti and Delon, the void of modern life. In the famous ending of L'Eclisse, Vitti walks out of the film. Never to reappear. In Instead, we see the places, street corners, where she and Dillon once were. The void seems to take over. The world seems empty. As if everyone is indoors or dead. We see this woman and think it's Viti, our main character, returned. But it's not. It's just another anxious passerby. As we've seen, the people in the films of the great masters of 50s art cinema, Robert Bresson, Federico Fellini, and Ingmar Bergman, are at the center of the movies, and the films themselves are based on closed worlds, prisons, circuses, the theatre. Antonioni's people, on the edge of the frame, are as unhappy as Bergman's or Bresson's, but they live in spaces so open that they, the spaces, seem to take over. Look at this ending of Antonioni's The Passenger, for example. Jack Nicholson's character is here, lying on his bed. The camera leaves him as it left Viti in L'Eclisse and seems to go for a walk. The film becomes this walk. The shot doesn't cut as it goes through the window grill. When the camera finally returns to Nicholson, he's dead. Whereas Bergman's characters seem to spiral inwards, Antonioni's spiral outwards. They disperse. This is the first time in the story of film that characters have dissolved into space. Antonioni's sense of what a human being is, a figure that can disperse, was almost Buddhist or Socratic. His long, slow, semi-abstract shots paved the way for three great European directors of the future. Hungary's Miklos Jancsó and Béla Tarr, and Greece's Theo Angelopoulos. This is the second shot in Angelopoulos' film The Travelling Players. The camera slowly withdraws. The shot's about the street as much as the people. In conventional cinema, this would establish the location, then we'd cut to a close-up. Angelopoulos doesn't give us the close-up. Antonioni's films weren't exactly a bundle of laughs, but in Italy's fellow southern European country, Spain, the new wave sweeping through world cinema in the 60s manifested itself in comedy. Take this film, The Wheelchair. The man standing in the middle is Don Anselmo. His wife has died and he's bored. There's nothing wrong with his legs, but he wants a motorized wheelchair because all his friends have one and it seems fun. You can meet in the park. What was new here was the edgy, nonconformist tone. Spain was still governed by its right-wing dictator, General Franco, so filmmakers weren't free to experiment openly. But The Wheelchair took a social problem, the living conditions of an old man, and mocked it. The film opens with men marching with toilets on their head, making fun of Franco's military marches. In the end, frustrated, Don Anselmo ends up poisoning his family. This combination of realism and irony in Spanish culture at the time was called esperpento, the grotesque. Spain's most famous post-Franco filmmaker, Pedro Almodóvar, said of this grotesque, in the 50s and 60s, Spain experienced a kind of neorealism, which was ferocious and amusing. I'm talking about The Wheelchair. Almodóvar's 1984 film, What Have I Done to Deserve This?, features the same kind of dysfunctional family as The Wheelchair. The tone, heartfelt, funny, absurd. is just like the wheelchair. The grandmother detests city life and just wants to go back to her village.
Qué frío hace en este Madrid. Si no me llevas al pueblo este invierno, me voy a helar viva. Oye, Antonio, los pellejos y los huesos guárdamelos para el postre.
And if Spain's take on the 60s new wave was mocking, then it's no surprise that the patron saint of movie mockery, Luis Buñuel, was there. This film, Viridiana, was made 30 years after Buñuel's L'Âge d'Or. It would become his most banned film ever and was a knee in the balls to Franco. A man approaches a woman on a bed and kisses her. Nothing too risque in that, but he's her uncle and she's a nun and he's drugged her. And earlier, we've seen him try on her white high heels and bask, and a young girl's watching. Buñuel sees the uncle as symbolizing Franco, shock after shock. And finally, in Sweden in the 60s, the modernist new wave surged. This notorious Swedish film, Vilgot Sherman's I Am Curious Yellow, was about a young woman who confronts life head on. In this scene, her burning belief in social justice starts to come apart because of a bad experience in her personal life. To cut the scene as if she's talking to Martin Luther King is daring indeed, politics as fantasy.
Hör på nu, Martin. För att det gäller. Men det bara är så. Han är en skit. En stor jävla skit, Börje. Och jag kommer att slå ihjäl när jag får tag i in. Jag ska skära tasken av han.
Luther King was still alive when the film was released. The scenes ethically disturbing now. The revolution in cinema in the late 50s and 60s was as groundbreaking as that in the 20s or 40s. Filmmakers sat in this cafe and places like it and dreamt of making cinema more personal, self-aware, ambiguous, enraged, and ironic. They achieved these things and, as we'll see, influenced movie making around the world. But nothing lasts forever, and the idealism of the French New Wave eventually had the stuffing knocked out of it. A film shot in this very cafe deals with that defeat. La Maman et le Putain is about this man and three women in cafes and in bedrooms. Jean-Pierre Léaud, the lively boy in Truffaut's Les 400 Coups, is now a man and shows his despair straight to camera.
C'est lamentable comme histoire. Je ne crois pas que la vie puisse ressembler à ces mondes mystérieux où on ne peut plus jamais revenir quand les portes se sont fermées.
He covers his eyes.
J'aurais préféré qu'elle meure, qu'elle se suicide.
The dreams of European cinema of the 60s were dead, but elsewhere they were just being born.
Ouais, ça va. Ouais, il y a ça.